Good morning. Yesterday was a short art day for me, but nonetheless, I did get about 3 pages finished in the sketchbook in which I'm working. But first, I want to conclude this little presentation. Yesterday, I showed you the last of the free comic books from 2018. Well, last year at the State Fair, 2017, uh, there was a booth which was giving out free comic books from that year. So the free comic books from May of 2018. There were a few left over in October, and so I got these comic books from last year. And just to finish out all of the free comic book day books, I'm just going to mention just a couple words about each of these. I'm not going to go in too much depth. Uh, Betty and Veronica, I'm not really sure what to say about this. I think the old Archie style was quite delightful, quite whimsical, and worked for the type of stories that they were telling. Now, I understand the argument that things must change. However, one important aspect of American culture is that there are some things which don't change, or which change very slowly. Uh, Americans like Coca-Cola. They like traditional hero stories. They like the original Star Wars trilogy, for instance. I I'm of the opinion that instead of releasing Solo last week, if Disney had just re-released the original Star Wars trilogy in its original format in theaters, I think they would have made uh, enough money. They would made a lot more than they were making from Solo. So anyway, I'm not entirely sure what is trying to be accomplished with this art style for Archie. Obviously, it's a different type of story. It's very wordy in some ways. It's meta humor, I suppose. I really don't understand the characterization of Betty. She has become an Amazon, uh, essentially. Uh, I also find some of the dialogue difficult to follow. I've talked before about the fake Southern dialect that we find in the Pogo comics, and I think children, if they read it aloud and just sort of develop their reading skills, won't have any problem with that. Uh, but not to contradict myself, I think this may actually be more difficult to read because this is written in what I'll call Buffy speak. It's kind of a fake teen dialect that doesn't really isn't very mellifluous. Okay, this was weird meta humor, which I'm not sure really belongs. I don't want to be too negative with these comics. This one is just not for me. Buffy. Speaking of Buffy speak, this speaking of Buffy speak, this comic was didn't really have Buffy speak. So once again, we're set with the issue of how to transplant uh, a television show into comics. We saw that yesterday with one of the comics that uh, we examined. This was delightful. This was fine. I did find interesting the comparison between Sailor Moon and Buffy. For those of us who were around uh, when Buffy first came out, that was actually about the same time, probably within a year or so, when Sailor Moon came out, and with the North American dub, of course. And for many of us, such as myself, Sailor Moon was the first anime we watched, and we didn't even know it was anime. We just thought it was just a regular Western cartoon, if we were even cognizant of that distinction, which we really weren't. Anyway, this was fine. This was fun. Superhero girls. This is a little bit like the Disney princesses in the sense of trying to. I don't want to say infantilize, but it's a I'm not sure whether this art style really works. Obviously, they're going for a younger reading audience, but I don't know. This almost looks like they're trying to experiment with a Flash animation style, which of which I'm not the biggest fan, although Flash can be used for good effect for certain things. Um, and it's weird because some of these characters are supposed to be different ages, and they don't really seem to fit well together, and there are bits of Greek mythology. I mean, DC's always had a weird relationship with Greek mythology, and it kind of hurts my head a little bit to try and make sense of it. Guardians of the Galaxy. Well, like most of us, I think I'm more familiar with the films than with the comic book series. Part of me wishes, and this may be a heretical thought, why don't, on Free Comic Book Day, why don't they just reprint issue number one just to get us into the series? Instead, we're in issue number, 123 and a half, and we just kind of, we don't really know what's going on. We kind of know bits of the movies. We just sort of have to guess from context. I'm not saying this is bad or anything. It's not badly drawn, and it may be a good story, but if when I think of trying to get my nieces and nephews into comics, I mean, just putting them right in the middle of a story is a little confusing. I can definitely understand the appeal of manga in the sense that you just start with volume one and go from there, and things just make a lot more sense. Okay, Riverdale, once again, Archie. In this case, this is based on the television show. I've never watched the television show. Once again, this comic is not meant for me. This, uh, I think this is meant for a teen audience. I think, but it almost seems more for an adult audience that wants to read Archie ironically. I did not. I don't think I really understood that comic. Secret Empire. Okay, once again, this is a tie-in from an event from last year. I'm not really going to talk too much about it, and from my perspective, it's almost incomprehensible. I don't know what's going on because I haven't followed from the beginning. I really wish we just had issue number one. Now, this cover I love. This is an inside joke, but they explain the inside joke. So, let's see if I can't show it. Cover by R. Sikoriak after John Mayer's cover for Famous Funnies number 1, 1934, the very first comic book. And we will talk about the history of comic books later. I'm working through a book that discusses that. Anyway, I don't know anything about SpongeBob, so I cannot talk about the accuracy of these characters. But this story is about getting some free comics on Free Comic Book Day, and it's a fun story. It's fun to read. Anyway, we're done with that. Star Wars. Now, we just can't get away from Star Wars between Solo coming out last week and these Star Wars comics. I am not entirely sure who the audience for these Star Wars comics are. They seem to be going for older fans of the original trilogy and trying to flesh out those stories in some ways. But then yesterday we saw the children's Star Wars, so they're going in different directions. I really have no idea how these fit together in canon at this point. I don't know if I can judge this. So I mean, these were just a couple pages from 3 or 4 different stories. They're just previews. As free previews right there. So they're relying on someone already liking Star Wars. Okay, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, or this was basically we're gonna make reference to 100 different stories, which the reader hasn't known about. So flashback. You remember this guy? You remember this guy? You remember this guy? You remember this guy? And some of these I remember from the cartoons, and some of them were just names. Once again, I think just issue number 1 would be a good way to get children into this. But I'm sure there are so many uh, incongruous Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle books at this time. And this was the State Fair, because that's where I got the comics. I did like how the bag in which they came in did mention the local comic book stores, and some of them have those stores stamped on these books. I try to support the local stores whenever possible. Anyway, in terms of art progress, yesterday I inked in 3 pages. So we have the soldiers getting ready to march in the parade, and this page is actually a callback to an earlier page where the soldiers are getting ready to march. So here are the same soldiers here. They're getting ready, and now that the march has begun, they are marching. And, this will be painted, so there'll probably be blue or orange or something around them. Okay, and this page is just supposed to get the idea of a legion of aliens marching, alien soldiers. I just wanted something simple, so this black circle gives the impression of an eye, and we just have lines and lines of aliens just marching along. And then I wanted there to be tanks in the parade, but there are no tanks in the type of comics that I'm telling. Oh, but they do have these Martian tripods from the War of the Worlds, so we get to see different types of tripods and different interpretations. And I draw in a vaguely steampunk manner, but it's more clockpunk, so I have random gears and less steam. Instead of steam, I tend to draw bubbles. And then this is going to be a missile, and this is from the St. Patrick's Day parade a couple months ago. They actually had a World War II missile on a float, and these old 90-year-old men were sitting on the missile and waving, and it was actually kind of funny. And my nephew thought that was hilarious. This old and it had a placard, World War II missile, and these ancient guys are there. And I'm just penciling it in, but I'm just kind of drawing bubbles and just people playing flutes or something. The aliens. Anyway, so I will ink this, and then I will start inking the next few pages, which I plan to be alien pipers. So I have to think about weird bagpipe designs and things like that. Now, unlike a real parade, we'll have soldiers, and then dancers, and then martial artists, and then more soldiers, and then kind of all mishmash. Because this is just a picture book, I've clumped things together. So we get all of the soldiers in one part, then we can get all the pipers in one part, so we don't have, a dozen bands, and then we're going to have, the kind of more circusy things. Because it's a progression. It would be weird in a picture book to just sort of kind of bounce back and forth from these different things, even though we do that in real life. And anyway, this will be today's project, and I will talk to you later next time. Bye-bye.